The first collection letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. I almost threw it away because I assumed it belonged to my father. Our names are distinct, but our mail often gets mixed up when the carrier is in a hurry, and the windowed envelope looked like the dozens of generic refinancing offers he received weekly. Then my eyes caught the bold font above the tear-off flap. It wasn't an offer. It was a formal demand for payment on a delinquent personal loan balance of $48,000, and my name was the only one printed on the voucher. I stood by the kitchen counter, the heavy afternoon sun cutting across the laminate floor, holding the piece of paper until my fingers left faint smudges on the cheap ink. My initial reaction wasn't panic, it was a profound, cold confusion. I was 25 years old, working a stable but modest job as an assistant registrar at a local community college, and my entire financial footprint consisted of a single checking account, a used sedan I paid cash for, and a spotless credit score I had meticulously maintained since turning 18. I had never applied for a loan in my life. I had never even looked at a private lending institution. The letter was from a company called Crestview Capital Group, a mid-tier digital lender specializing in high-interest unsecured lines of credit. According to the breakdown, the account had been opened 14 months ago. 6 consecutive payments had been made on time from an external account, and then, 4 months ago, the payments had simply stopped. The account was now 90 days past due, and the lender was preparing to route the file to a formal legal collection agency. I didn't scream. I didn't run into the living room to show my parents, even though I still lived in the finished basement apartment of their suburban home to save up for a down payment on my own place. Instead, I sat down at my small desks, pulled up my laptop, and went straight to the source. I pulled my official credit reports from all 3 major bureaus. When the screens loaded, the room seemed to lose its air. The Crestview loan was there, a jagged black ink line across my pristine history. But as my eyes scrolled further down the pages, the knot in my stomach tightened until it felt like lead. It wasn't just one loan. There was a secondary credit card account with a balance of $8,500, opened 2 years ago. There was an older utility account from a local energy provider that had been sent to collections 3 years prior, carrying a balance of $1,200. Every single account was registered under my social security number and my legal name. The billing addresses, however, bypassed the house completely. They were routed to a private post office box 3 miles north of our neighborhood. A post office box I had never rented. My mind tried frantically to construct an anonymous identity thief, a faceless digital hacker who had scraped my data off a compromised website or a leaked database. That was the logical conclusion. That was the story that made sense. I felt a sudden, deep wave of violation, the terrifying assumption that some stranger out there had total access to my identity, monitoring my life from a distance, systematically stripping away the financial stability I had worked so hard to establish. I closed the credit report tabs, locked the printed collection letter inside a secure metal lockbox under my bed, and walked upstairs for dinner, determined to tell my parents about this massive data breach. The kitchen smelled of garlic and roasted chicken. My mother was standing by the stove, humming softly, while my father sat at the head of the wooden dining table, reviewing a stack of invoices with a heavy frown. They looked completely, reassuringly normal. They looked like the parents who had attended my graduation, who had always insisted that family was the only thing that mattered in a cruel world. "Chloe, sweetie," my mother said, turning around with a warm smile. "You look tired. Rough day at the registrar's office?" "Mom, Dad, something really disturbing happened today," I said, sitting down in my usual seat across from my father. I watched his face closely, waiting for the shock that any parent would feel. "I got a collection notice. Someone has stolen my identity. There's a $48,000 loan, a credit card, and a utility bill out there in my name that I never opened." My father didn't look up from his invoices immediately. He deliberately finished writing a note on the margin of a paper, capped his fists with a slow, heavy click, and finally leaned back in his chair. His expression wasn't one of shock or parental concern. It was a familiar, patronizing mask of mild annoyance. "Chloe, let's not get hysterical," he said, his voice dripping with an expansive dismissiveness that always made me feel 10 years old. "You probably just misread a promotional flyer or a pre-approved credit offer. You young people see a large number on a piece of mail and immediately think the sky is falling. I run a commercial business. I deal with actual capital logistics every single day. Trust me, real identity theft doesn't just show up in a random letter. Drop it. I'll look at it when I have some free time next month." My mother walked over, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder, her eyes drifting toward me with a look of practiced, subtle guilt. Your father has enough on his plate trying to keep his business running, Chloe. We shouldn't be bringing petty imaginary emergencies to the dinner table. You've always been so sensitive about stress. Just let it go and eat your dinner. Family doesn't let silly paperwork ruin a nice evening. I sat perfectly still. Something about Dad's reaction felt completely wrong. He hadn't asked which bank it was. He hadn't asked if my social security number was compromised. He had immediately minimized it, pushing it away like a minor logistical annoyance rather than a massive financial violation of his own daughter, and my mother's instant deflection, calling a $48,000 collections demand a petty imaginary emergency, felt less like comfort and more like a calculated shield. A shadow of a doubt crept into my mind, cold and unsettling. Could someone local have done this? Someone who knew my schedule? I didn't push back. I didn't show them the papers. I just quietly finished my dinner, the food turning to ash in my mouth. The next morning, I began my investigation in absolute silence. I didn't call the police, and I didn't call Crestview Capital. If I flagged the accounts as fraudulent immediately, the bank's internal security teams would trace the IP addresses and the bank accounts used for the payments straight to our home network, and I needed undeniable, physical proof before making a move. During the hours my parents were out of the house, my father at various job sites and my mother running errands, I quietly searched the home office. I wasn't looking for hidden cash. I was looking for the paper trail of the parallel life that had been constructed under my nose. It took me 3 days to find the key. Hidden in the back of my father's filing cabinet, behind decades of old tax returns and expired insurance policies, was a small, unmarked manila folder. Inside were the registration documents for the private post office box 3 miles away. My heart hammered against my ribs as I looked at the signature on the P.O. Box lease agreement. It was my father's heavy, aggressive handwriting. He was the one who had opened the box. He was the one routing the mail away from the house. But as I flipped through the receipts, the it-gets-worse feeling hit me, a second force. There was a secondary document, a notarized power of attorney form bearing my name, dated 2 years ago. The signature at the bottom looked remarkably like mine, a smooth, practiced imitation of the cursive script I used on my driver's license. The notary stamp belonged to a woman named Brenda Vance, a legal assistant who worked out of a small accounting firm my father had used for his business taxes for over a decade. Oh my God, the thought echoed in the silent house, leaving me completely breathless. It really is them. My parents hadn't just stolen my identification for a temporary line of credit. They had systematically legally bound my identity to their financial decisions. They had created a mechanism that allowed them to sign documents, open accounts, and execute contracts in my name without me ever receiving a single phone call or a verification email. I took out my phone and snapped perfectly clear, high-resolution photographs of every single page in that folder, including the forged notary document and the P.O. Box registration. But as I reached the very bottom of the folder, my fingers brushed against a thick, textured piece of paper that didn't look like a loan application. I pulled it out. It was a certified deed of trust. My breath hitched in my throat as I read the legal description of the property. It wasn't a piece of commercial land for my father's business. It was a secondary mortgage, a secret equity loan for $110, Zuzan taken out against our family home. But it hadn't been applied to the house itself. The document indicated that I was listed as the primary guarantor, meaning if my father's business defaulted on the payments, the bank had the immediate legal right to garnish my wages and seize any future assets I ever accumulated. Worse, attached to the back of the deed was an application for a corporate tax identification number, registered in my name for a shell entity called CM Enterprises. My parents had used my clean record to register a completely separate corporate structure to root my father's bad business debts away from his own credit profile, burying the liability deep within an entity that on paper belonged entirely to me. They hadn't just taken out a few loans. They had weaponized my entire financial future, creating a massive web of corporate and personal debt designed to act as a human shield for my father's failing business ego. If the business collapsed, they would walk away relatively unscathed, while I would be left legally responsible for hundreds of thousands of dollars of corporate fraud. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a ghost in my own home. I ate dinner with them, I watched television with my mother on Friday nights, and I listened to my father complain about the rising cost of materials without a single trace of emotion on my face. Every time my father made a grand show of his success, bragging about how his business was the sole reason this family enjoyed comfort, I simply nodded and kept my voice perfectly flat. "You don't understand the weight of real responsibility, Chloe," he said one evening. swirling the whiskey in his glass, his tone dripping with an arrogant, unshakable superiority. You sit in your little college office processing paperwork, making a tiny, safe salary, while I'm out there making the real moves. You're lucky you have a father who knows how to manage resources, or you'd be drowning in the real world. I am learning a lot about resource management lately, Dad, I replied softly, my expression entirely neutral. Behind that calm exterior, I was moving pieces across a board they couldn't see. I spent my lunch breaks meeting with a consumer protection attorney downtown, a woman named Sarah Jenkins who specialized in familial identity theft and financial fraud. I laid the credit reports, the collection letters, and the photographs of the forged power of attorney and corporate deed flat on her polished mahogany desk. Sarah reviewed the documents with a slow, deliberate focus, her expression hardening with every page she turned. "This goes far beyond standard consumer identity theft, Chloe," Sarah said, looking up at me over her reading glasses. "The power of attorney form and the corporate shell entity mean they've managed to bypass traditional fraud detection because, on paper, you authorized it. If we go to the police right now, this is a major criminal matter. Your parents will face multiple felony counts of forgery, grand larceny, and bank fraud." "I don't want a public criminal trial, Sarah," I said, my voice completely steady, calm, and controlled. "I want my name cleared, I want the debt removed from my history permanently, and I want them to assume every single dime of this liability without me ever holding a legal attachment again. Tell me what we need to build an airtight case." For the next 10 days, under Sarah's direction, I gathered the final pieces of the file. I contacted the local utility company and requested the historical audit records for the collection account from 3 years ago. The IP address used to establish the online account matched my parents' desktop computer. I contacted the retail credit card company and requested the itemized transaction history. The card had been used to purchase high-end appliances currently sitting in our kitchen and a luxury vacation package my parents had taken for their anniversary. The ultimate breakthrough came when Sarah Jenkins tracked down the notary, Brenda Vance. When presented with the high-resolution photograph of her stamp on a document I had never signed, along with a draft of a formal complaint to the State Notary Public Licensing Board, Brenda's professional composure collapsed. She admitted in a certified affidavit that my father had brought the document to her office already signed, claiming I was too busy with work to join him, and she had stamped it as a personal favor to a long-term client. But then Brenda added one final detail that made the ground entirely fall out from beneath my feet. "Richard didn't bring that document in alone," Brenda whispered over the phone, her voice shaking on the recorded line Sarah had set up. "He brought the signature template. It was your mother, Chloe. Eleanor was the one who actually sat in my office and practiced tracing your handwriting onto the power of attorney form while Richard filled out the banking information. She laughed about it. She said you had such neat handwriting it was easy to copy." The "it gets worse" feeling became an absolute, suffocating reality. My mother wasn't a passive witness trying to keep the peace. She wasn't a victim of my father's overbearing ego. She was the architect. She was the one who handled the logistics, who forged the cursive script, and who physically managed the private P.O. box keys. She had worn a mask of maternal concern my entire life, all while systematically dismantling my future with a steady, smiling hand. The evidence file was nearly 3 inches thick, neatly organized in an encrypted digital drive and a physical leather binder sitting in the trunk of my car. It was time to schedule the confrontation. I chose the location with extreme care. I didn't want a sterile bank conference room, and I certainly didn't want to confront them in our house, where they could retreat to their rooms or scream behind closed doors. I wanted an environment where their performance of parental superiority would be completely stripped away by the weight of their own history. I scheduled the meeting at the Sterling Crest, a historic upscale restaurant downtown. It was the exact venue where my parents had hosted my college graduation dinner 2 years ago. On that night, my father had stood up in front of 20 relatives, raised a glass of expensive champagne, and given a booming speech about how his financial guidance and paternal sacrifice had ensured I graduated completely debt-free. He had used my milestone as a prop to project his own wealth and generosity to the entire extended family, while my mother smiled softly at his side, wiping away a fake tear. I called my mother and told her that since I was reaching a turning point in my career at the college, I wanted to take them back to the Sterling Crest to thank them for everything they had done for my future. My father's arrogance was on full display when they arrived at the restaurant. He wore his most expensive tailored suit jacket, walking into the elegant dining room with an expansive, confident smile, nodding patronizingly to the hostess. Good choice, Chloe, he said, settling into the plush leather booth near the back of the room, looking at me with an amused, dismissive chuckle. I see you finally saved up enough of your little administrative salary to afford a real meal. Let's get one thing straight, though. If you're planning to ask me for a car loan upgrade, the answer is no. You need to learn to live within your modest means, just like I did at your age. I don't need a car loan, Dad, I said, my voice perfectly level, calm, and entirely devoid of any emotional inflection. And I didn't invite you here to ask for money. I invited you here to present you with the $48, Zero's Crestview Capital loan, the $110,000 corporate deed of trust, and the forged power of attorney document currently sitting in your filing cabinet. The silence that followed was immediate and absolute. The clinking of silverware and the low hum of jazz music in the background seemed to fade into a distant static. My father's hand stayed frozen over his menu, his eyes widening in a sudden sharp calculation. But instead of panicking, his face hardened into a mask of pure, ugly contempt. He leaned across the table, his voice dropping into a low, vicious whisper. You ungrateful little brat. You think you've stumbled onto something clever? You sit in my house, you eat my food, and you have the audacity to look through my private files. Let me tell you how the real world works, Chloe. I built everything this family has. If I use your credit profile to bridge a temporary gap for my business, that is my right as your father. You owe me your entire life. You won't do a damn thing about it. My mother nodded sharply beside him, her soft maternal mask completely vanishing, replaced by a cold, calculating sharpness I had never seen before. Your father is exactly right, Chloe. How dare you trap us at a public restaurant with this nonsense? We gave you a clean slate, and we used a fraction of it to keep a roof over your head. You haven't lost anything. You're completely hysterical, just like always. We will go home right now. You will hand over whatever copies you made, and we will forget this disrespect ever happened. They thought they could bully me. They thought that the combined weight of their parental authority would make me collapse. Right here in the room where they had once celebrated my graduation. I'm not going home, I said softly, and I'm not hysterical. I looked toward the front entrance of the restaurant. Sarah Jenkins walked smoothly into the dining room, dressed in a sharp navy suit, carrying a thick leather binder. She slid into the booth right next to me, placing the binder flat on the white tablecloth, right between their wine glasses. What is this? My father hissed, his eyes darting from Sarah to me, the first crack of genuine panic showing in his voice. Who the hell are you? This is Sarah Jenkins, my legal counsel, I replied, keeping my voice entirely flat. And she is here to handle the transition. We aren't signing anything, and we aren't talking to a lawyer. My mother snapped, leaning forward, her eyes narrowing into slits as she stared at me. You don't have a case, Chloe. It's our word against yours. Good luck proving your father opened any of those accounts. A defense attorney will tear your little assumptions apart in 5 minutes. My mother was still playing the game. She still thought she was the hidden hand, entirely untraceable. Sarah Jenkins didn't say a word. She opened the binder, pulled out the first document, and laid it flat on the table. It was the high-resolution photograph of the power of attorney form, accompanied by the certified affidavit from Brenda Vance. We don't need to prove Richard did it, Eleanor, Sarah said, her voice cutting through my mother's cold confidence like an ice pick, because Brenda Vance has already given a sworn statement to the state notary board. She detailed exactly how you sat in her office, practiced Chloe's signature, and forged her name onto the legal template while your husband watched. My mother's breath hitched. The sharp, defiant posture she had held for the last 5 minutes completely dissolved. Her face went an absolute, chalky white in a span of 2 seconds. She looked down at the affidavit, her fingers twitching against her napkin as she realized her own handwriting had become her cage. How dare you? My father erupted, his face turning a deep, dangerous crimson as he tried to reclaim control by slamming his hand against the edge of the table. We raised you. You live in our house right now, rent-free. If you want to play this card, Chloe, you can pack your bags and get out on the street by tonight. I've already signed a lease on an apartment downtown, Dad, I said, my voice echoing with an unshakable weight. My bags are already packed. A moving truck is at the house right now, emptying the basement while we sit here. I don't need your house, and I don't need your permission. Sarah slid a second, much thicker document across the table, placing it directly over the forged signature. This is a formal debt assumption and indemnity agreement, Sarah explained. It stipulates that you and your wife will immediately assume full, sole legal liability for the Crestview loan, the retail accounts, and the corporate deed of trust. It requires a signed confession of liability that will be filed with the lender's fraud departments on Monday morning. completely removing Chloe's name from every entity. "And if I don't sign it," my father sneered, though his eyes were wide with a growing, unadulterated panic. "I'll tie this up in civil litigation for the next 5 years before you see a single cent cleared. If you don't sign this agreement by the time we leave this table, Richard," Sarah said, tapping her finger flat on her laptop screen, "Chloe will not be filing a civil suit. I will press enter on this terminal and a complete, certified digital copy of this entire file, including Eleanor's forgery affidavit, the IP transaction logs, and the itemized corporate fraud records, will be delivered automatically to the Financial Crimes Division of the State Police Department." Sarah looked up, her expression completely flat. "A felony conviction for bank fraud and grand larceny carries a mandatory minimum sentence is in a state penitentiary for both of you. By Monday morning, your clients, your bank manager, and your commercial suppliers will know exactly why the state police are reviewing your business ledgers." The words hung in the air of the elegant dining room like lead weights. My father slowly sank back down into the leather booth, the arrogance completely draining out of his face, leaving behind an old, broken man whose illusion of authority had been entirely dismantled. Next to him, my mother began to weep quietly, burying her face in her hands. It wasn't the manipulative, graceful crying she used at the dinner table. It was the frantic, desperate weeping of a person who realized that the game was completely over, and that the daughter she thought she could control forever had entirely outmaneuvered her in the dark. "The pen is right there," I said, pointing to the silver pen resting on the center of the table. "You have 5 minutes to sign the debt transfer agreement before Sarah sends the file to the state police. The choice is entirely yours." My father stared at the silver pen for a long time, his breathing heavy and ragged. He looked at my mother, who could only offer a weak, terrified nod through her tears. He knew he had no exit, with a heavy, visible effort that seemed to age him 10 years. In a single moment, my father reached out, picked up the pen, and scrawled his signature across the bottom of the debt assumption agreement. He passed it to my mother, whose hands shook so violently she could barely hold the barrel of the pen as she added her name next to his. They pushed the folder back across the table toward Sarah Jenkins. Neither of them looked up at me. They couldn't. Their gazes were fixed entirely on the white tablecloth, their mouths set in tight, bitter lines of complete defeat. Sarah checked the signatures, verified each page with a crisp, professional nod, and closed her leather binder with a satisfying click. "Everything is in order, Chloe. The formal transfer will be executed with the lenders by Monday afternoon." "Thank you, Sarah," I said. I stood up from the booth, looking down at the two people who had raised me, feeling absolutely no anger left in my heart, only an immense, quiet space where their control used to live. I walked out of the dining room, stepped past the elegant hostess stand where my graduation photos had once been celebrated, and walked out into the crisp evening air. 6 weeks have passed since that night at the Sterling Sis, and the final fallout of my parents' decisions has completely settled into reality. The transition wasn't a miracle or a dramatic triumph. It was a quiet, legal restructuring. The Crestview Capital loan, the retail credit card, and the massive $110,000 corporate liability have been entirely transferred to a commercial secondary liability line under my parents' names. Because they had to absorb nearly $200,000 of debt in an instant, their margins have become incredibly tight. Last week, I heard from an old neighbor that they had to sell my father's commercial vehicles and place the suburban home on the market just to meet the new, monthly restructuring payments. My mother hasn't tried to call me once. The extended family has split into a quiet, awkward distance. Some of my aunts tried to send me text messages about the importance of family forgiveness, but when I politely offered to send them the certified photographs of the forged signatures and the corporate fraud affidavits detailing my mother's direct involvement, the messages stopped entirely. They didn't want the truth. They wanted the illusion of a happy family. But I was done living inside their illusions. I live in a small, sunlit one-bedroom apartment downtown now, a 10-minute walk from my office at the community college. The space is modest, furnished with second-hand pieces and boxes I'm still slowly unpacking. But every single item inside these 4 walls belongs completely to me. The air here feels clean. There are no heavy, passive-aggressive sighs at the dinner table, no subtle hints of financial doom designed to make me feel small, and no invisible walls of guilt trapping me in a basement. Yesterday morning, I pulled my credit report one final time just to verify the clearance. When the screen loaded, the jagged black lines were gone, replaced by a clean, neutral history that reflected exactly who I am. A 25-year-old woman with a modest income, a spotless slate, and a future that belongs entirely to her. I sat at my new kitchen table, looking out at the city streets below, feeling a deep, solid weight lift from my shoulders. I don't feel anger toward my parents anymore, and I don't feel a desire for further punishment. They are living in the reality they created, paying for the choices they made in the dark. I learned a lesson through those months of quiet observation, a lesson that isn't taught in schools or written in family scrapbooks. Blood makes you related, but it doesn't give anyone an automatic, unlimited license to use your future as collateral for their failures. Your life, your independence, and your name belong only to you, and protecting them isn't selfish. It is the very first step toward truly being free. If this story reminded you that patience and preparation are more powerful than loud confrontation, and that family loyalty should never come at the expense of your own future, please leave a like on this video. It truly helps our community grow. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another confession of quiet justice. Thank you for listening to Story Reads tonight. Keep your boundaries strong, and I will see you in the next account.